Before anything else, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because what you're about to hear today isn't ordinary content. It's the kind of message that, once it hits you, starts stirring things up inside and won't let you go back to the same place. And if you've prayed a lot, asked, insisted, cried, and still feel like nothing is changing, this video is for you. Not by chance. By alignment. There's a paradox that almost no one dares to talk about. Prayer doesn't guarantee change. I know it sounds controversial, but it's liberating when you understand it. Because many people pray for prosperity, but continue living, thinking, and deciding as if they only expect to survive. Faith asks for progress, but the mind still holds the brakes. And that's where the silent frustration of thinking God doesn't answer is born, when in fact, something inside isn't yet ready to sustain the response. Perhaps you've already thought, if God wants me to prosper, why does it seem so difficult for me? This question isn't weakness, it's a growing awareness. The problem has never been a lack of prayer, nor a lack of faith, nor a lack of merit. The problem is more subtle, more internal, more invisible. And when you see that, everything starts to make sense. Today you will understand what is really hindering the flow, and why adjusting that changes everything faster than you imagine. Why prayer doesn't guarantee change when the inner self remains misaligned. Have you ever noticed how it's possible to pray every day and still feel like life remains the same? This happens because prayer isn't a magic formula. It's internal alignment. Many people talk to God but continue thinking, deciding, and reacting in the same old way. Their mouths ask for change, but their minds insist on repeating the past. And that's where the silent frustration arises. Why is nothing working out for me? The truth is uncomfortable, but liberating. Praying without adjusting your inner self is like asking for directions using an old map. You might walk, but you always end up back at the same point. If deep down there's a fear of losing, a fear of making mistakes, or a fear of growing, the mind creates automatic brakes. You say you want to prosper, but you avoid decisions that require greater responsibility. Have you ever seen someone who prays for opportunities, but freezes when they appear? It's not a lack of faith, it's an internal conflict. Perhaps the problem was never prayer itself, but the internal environment where that prayer falls. Repetitive thoughts create invisible tracks, and you end up walking on them without realizing it. As long as these tracks are not revised, nothing external holds up. This is where many people get confused and start to think that God doesn't answer. But what if the answer has already come, but you haven't yet adjusted your receptors? That's exactly where the next point comes in. The invisible block. Silent beliefs that sabotage prosperity. There's a type of blockage that makes no noise, doesn't appear in words, and is almost never consciously perceived. These are silent beliefs, formed throughout life, that shape small decisions every day. You don't wake up thinking, I'm going to sabotage myself, but you avoid certain risks, postpone important actions, and settle for less than you could handle. These beliefs often stem from past experiences, phrases heard in childhood, or unresolved failures. The problem is that they continue to operate on autopilot. Perhaps deep down, there's this idea that thriving is too much work, alienates people, or brings pain. So without realizing it, you create safe limits to avoid crossing them. It's like driving with the handbrake on. The engine works hard. The noise increases, but the car doesn't move. And then comes the exhaustion. The feeling of effort without reward. Not because you don't try, but because you try from a mind that still distrusts growth. The most curious thing is that these beliefs don't shout, they whisper. They appear in thoughts like, this isn't for me, it's always harder for me, or, when things get better, something goes wrong. If this sounds familiar, it's no coincidence. As long as these ideas continue to be treated as truths, they will drive important choices. And it is precisely here that many people begin to confuse humility with limitation, without realizing the impact this has on their own identity. And that's what we need to look at next. Identity and worthiness. The hidden fear of growing and sustaining more. At some point in life, without realizing it, you built an identity based on how much you could endure, not how much you could expand. Survival became a test of strength, and thriving began to seem distant or even dangerous. Growing requires taking on more responsibility, more visibility, and more decisions, and that's frightening when your self-image is still stuck at the old level. So you even want to move forward, but you feel a strange discomfort when you get close. It's not laziness, it's internal conflict. There's also the issue of deserving, which almost no one admits out loud. You help, you give, you strive, but when something good comes your way, something inside blocks you. Guilt arises, the feeling of "I didn't do enough," or "others need it more than I do." This creates an invisible imbalance in the flow of life. Prosperity isn't just about acquiring, it's about sustaining it, without punishing yourself for it. If receiving generates guilt, the internal system collapses. Perhaps the fear isn't of failing, but of succeeding and not knowing who you'll be afterward. Because growing up changes routines, changes relationships, and even changes how you see yourself in the mirror. And if deep down you still see yourself as small, you'll unconsciously try to return to a familiar place. That's why before any external change, something needs to be adjusted in how you define yourself. And this becomes even more evident when we look at the relationship between control, anxiety, and excessive effort. Control, anxiety, and overexertion, when trying too hard, stalls everything. There comes a point where effort ceases to be a virtue and becomes a blockage. You try to foresee everything, control everything, guarantee everything, as if relaxing were a sign of irresponsibility. The mind is in constant alert, and the body follows this tension. The problem is that prosperity doesn't arise in cramped internal environments. When everything is under excessive control, there's no room left for the new to enter. Perhaps you've learned that you only deserve something when you suffer, when you sacrifice yourself to the limit. So without realizing it, you associate growth with exhaustion. If something starts to flow more smoothly, distrust arises. Something is wrong. Ida. This makes you tighten your grip, work harder, carry more than you need to. The result is not progress, it's burnout. And prolonged burnout undermines clarity, creativity, and good decisions. Anxiety creates an illusion of productivity, but it steals your presence. You may accomplish a lot, but you do it disconnectedly. And when the mind is always in the future, trying to avoid mistakes, it loses sensitivity to simple opportunities in the present. It is in this state that many people pray asking for guidance, but they don't perceive the signs. Because listening requires calmness, and it is precisely this calmness that will clash with everything from the unresolved past. Letting go of the past. When old wounds still govern current decisions. You may no longer talk about the past, but it continues to speak through your choices. Old situations, unresolved pains, and repeated frustrations create invisible filters in the mind. So every time something new arises, you evaluate it using past experiences as a reference. It's not conscious, it's automatic. And the automatic tends to protect, not expand. Perhaps you've already tried something and gotten hurt, trusted, and been disappointed, dared, and fallen. The mind learns quickly. Better not go that far again. But this defense mechanism becomes a comfortable prison. You stay safe, but limited. Growing requires letting go of old wounds as a compass, because they always point to the same place: fear. While the past remains in control, the future only appears as a disguised repetition. You may change the scenario, but you react the same way. That's why some people say, "It always happens the same way to me." It's not bad luck, it's an active emotional pattern. And before any external change, this pattern needs to be interrupted, especially when the subject is something that almost no one learns properly: receiving without guilt. Learning to receive. Guilt, self-punishment, and imbalance in the flow. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to give, to help, and to give of yourself, but how strange it feels when something comes your way? When recognition, money, opportunity, or care arrives, something tightens inside. The mind begins to justify, minimize, or even reject it. Not because you don't want it, but because learning to receive requires emotional maturity. Receiving is accepting that you sustain, manage, and honor what comes to you. Many people confuse kindness with self-punishment. Deep down, they believe that accepting too much is selfishness or danger. So they give without limit and receive with guilt. This imbalance creates a broken flow. Everything goes out, little comes in. And when it does come in, it doesn't stay. Prosperity doesn't work like that. It needs a two-way flow, a healthy circulation, without shame in being on the receiving side. As long as receiving what seems wrong, life will continue to test you until you learn. It's not punishment, it's adjustment. Receiving is also faith. Faith that you won't get lost. Faith that you are resilient. Faith that you grow without abandoning who you are. When that starts to change, something organizes itself inside. And it's at this point that a silent but decisive question arises. How far are you willing to go in deciding differently from now on? Internal decision. The exact point where everything starts to change. There's a silent moment when nothing changes on the outside, but everything changes on the inside. It's not an announcement. It's not exaggerated emotion. It's an internal decision. You simply stop diminishing yourself, stop postponing, and stop negotiating with old limitations. This decision makes no noise, but it reorganizes everything. Priorities change, choices become clearer, and certain behaviors automatically lose their power. Perhaps you're waiting to feel completely secure before acting, but that almost never happens. The decision comes before confidence, not after. You decide first, and the mind adjusts along the way. It's like crossing a bridge in the fog. You don't see the end, but you trust the next step. Those who wait for absolute clarity usually remain still, mistaking fear for prudence. When that decision happens, something subtle changes in how you position yourself. You speak differently, react differently, choose differently. Not because you've become a different person, but because you've stopped acting out of fear. And it's precisely in this new positioning that life begins to respond in a different way. But a decision without practical alignment becomes an empty promise, and that's what needs to be adjusted now. Practical alignment: how to align mind, faith, and action in daily life. Everything said so far only holds up when it becomes simple practice in daily life. Alignment isn't a pretty concept, it's daily adjustment. It's about observing how you think when you wake up, how you react to small problems, and which decisions you unconsciously avoid. Mind, faith, and action need to communicate with each other. Otherwise, you pray one way, think another, and act in conflict. This misalignment is tiring and confusing. A practical adjustment begins when you start asking yourself, is what I'm doing today bringing me closer to or further away from the life I say I want? It can be something simple, like stopping automatic complaining, better organizing your money, or ending conversations that drain your energy. Small conscious choices change your inner field, and when the field changes, external responses begin to follow. Alignment also requires consistency, not perfection. You will make mistakes, adjust, and try again. The point is not to do everything right, but to not revert to the old autopilot. When mind, faith, and action begin to walk together, you notice something curious. The feeling of struggle diminishes, and the feeling of direction increases. And it is in this state that prosperity ceases to be an effort and becomes a consequence, opening space for something even deeper. Now let me ask you some direct questions, the kind that don't require an out-loud answer, but demand honesty. What within you still resists growth? Where do you still ask for change, but insist on thinking, deciding, and acting in the same way? Prosperity doesn't begin when money arrives. It begins when you stop diminishing yourself. And from today onward, you can no longer say you didn't know where the adjustment was. Everything you've heard here wasn't meant to accuse you. It was meant to set you free. Because when you understand that the blockage was internal, the power returns to your hands. You can adjust beliefs, change decisions, release unnecessary controls, and learn to receive without guilt. The question now isn't whether God wants you to prosper. That was never in doubt. The question is, what are you going to do with this awareness? So I challenge you to apply at least one thing even today. A different choice. A conversation you've been putting off. A boundary that needs to be set. A thought that needs to be stopped. Profound changes begin like this, discreetly but firmly. And if you felt something click into place inside, it's a sign that the alignment has already begun. If this video resonated with you, write in the comments, "I allow it to thrive." This isn't just a pretty phrase, it's an internal stance. And take this opportunity to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because here you don't just learn how to ask for change, you learn how to sustain change when it arrives. We continue this journey together.